Welcome everybody to the second breakout session. This is the government industry one. The paper will be analysis of risk management practice in oil and gas industry in Southeast Texas after Hurricane Harvey. Dr. Gevorg Saksarian will be doing it. I am James Sladen, and then there's Henry Venta online. Dr. Saksarian will be presenting it. So if you want to start, you can always send in questions we can ask towards the end.
Thank you, Dr. Sladen. Thank you very much. So this project came out of the grant, Recovery and Resiliency Recovery Grant, sponsored by United States EDA. And we did different cluster analysis, and we tried to analyze what is the impact of Harvey on different industries and sectors of economy of Southeast Texas. And we want to appreciate for that opportunity that EDA provided us, provided big funding. Without that funding, there was no way to complete this comprehensive analysis. So in this section, we will talk about risk management practices in oil and gas industry. So me, Dr. Sladen, Dr. Venta, and two other members of our group, we did this comprehensive analysis, and you will see the results, and they are very interesting. Just a little bit introduction and background. We know that Southeast Texas economy based on oil and gas production, and when there is some natural disasters, rapid recovery is necessary to be able to go back and to return to the normal activity and economic activity. The recovery of this industry obviously depends on efficient risk management from natural disasters, and this industry particularly should manage well to be able to go back. We developed a very innovative model to analyze the industries, and we called it PARM, Participatory Analysis of Risk Management, which we used different kind of models, and you will see in the next slides. It is not a secret that oil and gas sector employs a lot of workers in Southeast Texas. There are more than 50,000 people directly and indirectly involved in oil and gas production in Beaumont and Port Arthur MSA. And it is more than 30% of employed population. So that shows us the importance of this sector for our region. The GDP on annual growth was 21% in 2016-17 years and 9.3% in 2017-18. There was a little bit slowdown, but still comparing with other sectors, you can see that this sector of economy is growing very fast in Southeast Texas. So examples of big companies, multinational companies of this region: ExxonMobil, Motiva, Valero, Total, and other petrochemical plants such as DuPont, BASF, Chevron, Goodyear, and etc. And these are the huge multinational companies that contribute in the wealth of our region, Southeast Texas, and especially in Jefferson, Hardin, and Orange counties. We have the strong economy. We have the oil and gas, which is the engine of the wealth of this region, but we also are vulnerable to hurricanes and natural disasters. As you can see in this slide, we brought 4 examples of major storms that caused the big financial losses. Allison in 2001, the economic loss was $12 billion and insured loss was $5 billion. Rita caused more damage, $23.9 billion, and insurance companies and compensation was $11 billion. Next one, Ike, was $43 billion damage storm, and insurance companies covered $21 billion. And the last and worst hurricane was Harvey in 2017, which caused a $125 billion loss, and the insurance loss was only $30 billion. So as you can see, there is a big financial damage to the economy of Southeast Texas, which is not compensated by insurance companies. So we tried to analyze, and we used different sources, especially of Bureau of Economic Analysis and other publicly available sources, to understand what was the slowdown of economic activity. And as you can see in the first bulleted point, 60% of U.S. upstream chemical manufacturing capacity impacted. There was a shutdown of 25% of refining capacity, and it is 3.8 million barrels per day production. 24.5% of oil production in Gulf of Mexico was shut down, and it is 428,000 barrels per day. 25.9% of natural gas production was impacted, and also the 50% of polyethylene and 60% of the polypropylene production was reduced. So as you know, the big producer of oil and gas and petrochemical materials, Beaumont has a big share, and if you shut down this activities, then it's a big harm and this big problem. 105 of 737 production platforms in the Gulf of Mexico were closed, and also there was a disruption of chemical production. Pipelines also were affected, and transportation backlog impacted negatively. On September 15 of 2017, month after Harvey made the landfall, most of the refineries and chemical plants had restarted their activities, and we have some interesting findings how resilient are the petrochemical companies and oil and gas refineries in our region. So the methodology, what we did, we created an interesting method, participatory analysis of risk management. If me and my colleagues are sitting in our offices and just reading and trying to look the secondary sources, it's not enough to analyze and get conclusions. We found a very interesting model, participatory appraisal of competitive advantage, PACA, developed by Germans and implemented in Brazil. Both Chamber of Commerces, they cooperated, and George Meyer Steamer in 2006 invented this methodology. And this method uses the theory of location competition and economic development created by well-known professor Michael Porter, who is a professor in Harvard Business School. The methodology uses the Porter's diamond and also Porter's 5 forces analysis and also value chain analysis. We used some components of this method in our methodology. And this method was very interesting method because it helps to bring together all parties, all stakeholders of particular industry, and also the other stakeholders such as local government and international organizations. And it was very successfully used in many countries, growing and emerging countries also. Well, we adopted this methodology and we said, yes, we're going to use the 3 core elements of PACA, and we're going to do a participatory, first element, analysis, profound analysis of risk management. So the 3 core elements were in place, and we defined the steps of analysis, how we're going to start to work. The first phase was our research team workshop with the leadership of Dr. Venta and Dr. Sladen. We sit together and came up with questions. What are the main questions that we need to ask to different industry groups, and to understand what is their best managerial or the best risk management practices. Later on, we analyzed the value chain of each industry. In this particular case, we analyzed the value creation of oil and gas sector, and the reason that we did that was to identify the main stakeholders in each value chain. So we were able to go and meet and talk. And the next part of the research was the intensive focus group workshops and interviews. So after we detected who are our target group of research and what questions we're going to ask, then we went and we conducted the focus group workshops to the main stakeholders, and we tried to gather as much as qualitative data we can. We came to our offices, sit together, and started to analyze, and there were some cases when we needed some more explanation, more interpretation. The next possible step was to go and do more field work, meet individually with oil and gas company leaders and try to understand what's going on, how they explain this risk management problems. And final step of this methodology is taking place today here when we communicate with community, and I'm sure there are people who are watching us from the society or from other regions, and this is the last phase when we bring and demonstrate the results. Here are the results, here are the challenges, here are the risks, and how they were able to meet those risks. So the core of this analysis were these main questions that we identified. The first question that we tried to ask and get as much as data we can was, what risks and problems did you experience during Hurricane Harvey? The second one, what were the most successful risk management strategies? So here we're trying to identify the best managerial practices. The next one, where there were risk management strategies that were not as successful. So there were some examples when companies didn't very efficiently manage, and we were able to identify that. So they learned the lesson and they're planning to improve. Next few questions are, how did you manage the recovery process, and what risks or challenges did you encounter during recovery? And last two questions, the first one, what role the technology and communications play in the response to this natural disaster, and which were the most successful ones, like communication via social media, mass text to the other groups, and you will see that. And the last one, what would you like to see to happen if there is another hurricane? And it was kind of asking their wish list, what you would like to happen in this region, government and private and public cooperation together, so you can overcome this crisis easily and fastly. Well, we have these questions. Then next part, who we're going to ask the question. So value chain analysis helps us to understand how the value flows through the entire chain. And as you know, oil and gas have three main components in their value chain: upstream level, midstream, and downstream. And in each segment you have different companies, different organizations involved, starting from extracting the crude oil, the transportation of crude oil. Then next step is refining. After refining, if it's final product, then they distribute through pipelines and tankers to the final customer, or if there are other chemical components that need to be refined more and go to the petrochemical manufacturing, well, then it flows to the second channel of this value chain. So we identified the main players, and we visited and sat with the top managers and started to ask these questions to get the responses. And as you can see in the next three slides, we have this color coding. Blue is the preparedness of hurricanes and storms in general. Then the next part, the yellow, orangish color is the risks that related to Harvey, specifically to this storm, and the green one, the best managerial practices and lessons that companies learned. And we divided this analysis in three main groups. The first one, the preparedness when they shut down the plant. The second one, what risks existed during the plant shutdown, and then the best risk management practices, again during plant shutdown. The next one will be the plant restart section that we discuss, and also how they manage their human resources. So let me go one by one and present you the results, and if you have questions, please answer, and Dr. Venta, Dr. Sladen, please intervene if you have any comments or to add something. So the first segment, the biggest challenge in petrochemical business is it takes time to slow down activities and shut down and stop the activities. To safe stop, they need from 22 to 48 hours to just safely slow down and stop the activities. But if it's major hurricane and they need to completely shut down plant, it may take from 1 to 2 weeks. So they need to know well in advance when to start shutting down the facilities. For example, one of the examples was in pipelines, they transport the hot asphalt, and if they shut down without special procedures, it can get cold and dry, and all pipeline and the investment will be zero. The other extreme case was some facilities and some equipment should be stayed in a cold temperature, and if not, then it might cause explosion and problems. So as you can see, it's not as easy to stop. It's not like immediately slow down or stop that they can do. So for this reason, plants have some special procedures and special policies how they need to address disasters. And most of them, they have their policies. And because Harvey was an unprecedented and big event, many companies, they introduced new chapters and new sections in their hurricane policies to be able to address better. And the next one, in order to start the shutdown procedures on time, they use meteorological services and they need prognosis to be able to in advance shut down the operations. The next part is the plant has some special communication devices always in place, like satellite phones, to be able to communicate if there is some interruption of usual communication modes. So as you can see, there are some good aspects. They are prepared, they have their policies in place, but there were some risks, and despite of being mainly prepared, and their facilities is designed to handle natural disasters of this kind because it's very specific to Southeast Texas region. But one of the challenges was rainfall during Harvey was unprecedented, and most of the plants, they have capacity to drain from 14 to 17 inches of flood water during 24 hours. And as you know, Harvey exceeded this amount, and it caused the shutdown of facilities because they were not able to drain the water and maintain the continuous operations. They also had some risk related with the local weather forecasting. Yes, meteorological services, they give information about flood and predict what is going to happen in general in region, but they don't identify specific locations of each plant. So each plant needs specific and their own weather forecasting services to understand what is going to happen with their facilities and equipment. And also the other challenge, other risk was the conflicting information about rainfall. different meteorological services gave different information, and it confused people. Some people thought it's not going to be as hard. Some people thought it's going to be horrible. So for that reason, you will see in the best management practices, many plants are trying to build their own weather stations. The other biggest risk was related with the loss of the city water service. And as you know, during July, August, in summertime, it's very hot here, and they need to have air conditioning running in their offices and buildings. And this was a big problem, and unexpected city's water shutdown caused a big problem. Well, these are the risks, and we came up with best managerial practices and lessons that they learned, and we will point out in a bullet points this main lessons that they learned. The first one is the preparation for hurricane season starts in May, and they try to start way in advance. In response to Harvey, they put new policies and procedures in place, and new chapters have been added in their policies. To manage water flush in a more efficient manner, plants improve their drainage system. They have projects that will help to increase their capacity, and production facilities and equipment will have been raised to minimize the potential of the flood damage. And also, as a response to Harvey, new weather stations were built in some plants, and there are plans to continue building their own forecasting centers to understand the real-time rainfall measurement to be able to manage more efficiently. Then they also established more detailed local weather network, which could assist industry and prepare and respond to emergencies. And better measurement of flood water and rain is very, very important here. Especially we went and tried to understand how they're measuring, and there are a couple of places where the gauges are in horrible shape, and they should be improved. And we're living in a century that we have new technologies, and satellite systems can transmit that information instead of going and taking the boat and measuring using the tape and all that kind of stuff, which is something that should be improved. Most of the plants, they didn't lose the power, and utilities were kept running because they were prepared. And how they managed the shutdown of city water, they used the fire water reserves to be able to run their air conditioners and to be able to continue their activities. The other thing that is come up as an idea, and we recommend that can be a best practice, during this flooding period, most of the plants, they need pumps, and they don't have that capacity. There might be a possibility to create some centralized warehouse where people can rent those pipes and drain the water and use more efficient. The other idea was to have shared satellite service where some provider can provide the communication devices instead of having in each plant some satellite phones, and do not use all the year and spend money on that. So this is the first part related to plant shutdown. Next part is, well, hurricane is over, and what difficulties companies had to restart their activities, and what best managerial practices they had. Another big problem is that restarting petrochemical and oil and gas refineries, it also takes time, as it takes time to shut it down, and it might take from 1 to 4 weeks. However, the complete recovery takes much longer time. And if you take into consideration that this is time-consuming procedure and there is a logistical problems, and they need spare parts, and roads are closed, and raw materials and products cannot be delivered or shipped, then it slows down recovery more. The biggest resource in our region is Sabine Neches waterway, which is a critical and strategic logistical resource. And when there is an interruption of activity of this waterway, it can have significant problems for shipment and raw materials and finished products. There is high reliance on pipelines, and they were probably more resilient transportation modes. And railroads also impacted negatively more than pipelines and other logistical channels. We identified big risks. Harvey's magnitude was very high, and it caused a deficit of the spare parts, and plants, they didn't have in their inventory that many spare parts and supplies. And what they did, they ordered, but bingo, there is a problem. Logistical channels are closed, and some of the plants, they were able to deliver using aircraft to Houston Airport, but to get that to Beaumont, it's not easy task because roads are in a bad shape and it's not open. Some of the companies, they were able to manage in a way that if they have capacity, they had helicopters to deliver from Houston to Montaigne Center area, and then from there they took to their plants. Usually when we talk about these risks, we paint it in a negative way, but then we have this best risk management practices that they put in place. So one of the recommendations that can be a best practice, we came up with this idea that companies can have centralized inventory warehouse where they can have stored inventory to the specific events, and despite of additional holding period and potential damage, they can structure and raise facilities to be able to keep them without harm. A preparedness measure for post-hurricane plant restart training for all employees also can be implemented. Training is very important, and everyone should know how to act. And in some cases, when they don't have that training, there is some confusion and stress and problems. The other idea that we came up, the centralized transportation hub near to Beaumont Airport can be a solution to the deficit of the spare parts as a post-recovery measure, and maybe they can create some specific facility where they can transport, instead of taking Houston, just directly deliver the spare parts to Beaumont. And hurricane affected in different parts of different plants, and we discovered that one of the best managerial practices was the prioritized maintenance, and they started to do a zoning after hurricane and maintain and fix based on the urgency and also the level of damage. The next component, the flexible production, well, if we can't recover and restart all production capacity, we can slowly reopen and restart different activities. For example, one of the oil and gas companies, they were able to start jet fuel production well in advance before the other production parts will start. And the last one, there can be there is a need always of additional financial reserves, funds to set aside to purchase necessary supplies during the recovery period, because companies are going to deal with this and they always need some reserves. Plant shutdown, plant restart, these risks and best managerial practices This business is all about human resources. Labor is very important, and in next segment we try to identify and understand, okay, how it affected on human resource management during plant shutdown and plant restart. Plants, they highlighted that recovery of from the shutdown, and especially recovery from this kind of big events, needs extra manpowers. They always need many employees to be able to fix and clean and repair. And hiring new employees is a time-consuming procedure because there are specific guidelines and safety protocols that they need to train people, do some background checks, and it is another factor that slows down the recovery. And the other human resource challenge is to get labor force to work because of the road closure. If there is no communication, transportation, how people are going to go to the plant. Risks that we identified, nearly half of the employees of oil and gas industry were impacted personally, whether they lost their homes or cars or get flood in their properties. The safety of families and damage to the properties of workers, it obviously creates difficulty in having them to return to go back to the work. The personnel who was on site were not able to leave to go home, and they stayed and spent their nights in the offices, and in some cases they mentioned that they sleep in their offices. And the personnel who was in their homes, they were not able to report to work because of the roads closure and all those problems. This is the big problem that they need to address, and in best practices we have some recommendations also. There are strict guidelines and safety protocols, as I mentioned, to hire additional people in the work, and it slows down the recovery. And high demand for workers from different plants, it take from the pool the workforce, and it becomes more competitive and problematic. Also the lack of the medications and also the food supplies during that period is a critical issue and was a risk during Hurricane Harvey. Now, big list of the best managerial risk practices. First one, we're living in the globalized and in a century where information technologies have a lot of role. As you can see, with this pandemic, we can organize this conference online. Well, in many cases, the plants, the administrative staff and others who could work from home remotely and use their computers and continue working, they manage that. During recovery, part of the workforce wasn't needed, and some companies, they use that remaining workforce to efficiently recover and help people who are in need, and send people to fix the homes and clean and help